Federal agents say they stopped millions of dollars of hard drugs from hitting the streets. The feds making that announcement just a few hours ago.
It started like any ordinary morning in Georgia. A black SUV was pulled over on the edge of a quiet county road, just outside Atlanta's sprawl. But inside the vehicle, police officers found 2 handguns, $48,000 in cash, and something far more disturbing. A sealed envelope with a courthouse clerk's name printed on it. That envelope would trigger one of the most explosive corruption investigations in recent U.S. history, reaching deep into courtrooms, police departments, and cartel networks across 7 states. What was inside that envelope, and how did it lead to nearly 2 tons of drugs and 21 officers under arrest? Subscribe to Military Power to follow the whole investigation, because the truth inside that envelope changed everything. The name on the envelope led investigators to a desk that had sat quietly beneath the fluorescent lights of a Georgia courthouse for years. No one had looked twice at the woman who worked there. She was part of the background, a clerk who handled scheduling orders, processed arrest logs, and shuffled case files between offices. Her job was not meant to raise suspicion, but the envelope had told a different story. As the FBI began its discreet review, it found itself looking at a person whose digital trail led in directions that no court employee should ever travel. The first thing they requested was access to the court's case management system. Not the public records, but the internal logs, the archived backups, and the metadata hidden behind daily operations. Within hours, red flags began to surface. Dozens of case files were incomplete. Some were missing final pages, while others had irregular timestamps showing edits just minutes before convictions were overturned or bonds were released. One file had been saved under 3 different names, each with a different verdict, yet all pointing to the same defendant. Investigators found case IDs that existed in paper form but lacked digital counterparts. Others had been duplicated, rerouted, or rewritten altogether. What initially appeared to be routine clerical mistakes began to follow a pattern. The files most likely to be missing data all belonged to narcotics trafficking cases involving high-weight seizures and complex interstate transfers. On the surface, they were random. Beneath that, they were connected by timing, method, and approval signatures. FBI analysts started cross-referencing case records with activity logs tied to individual user accounts. One account appeared again and again. It belonged to the same clerk named on the envelope. Her credentials were used to enter restricted file rooms, unlock sealed court documents, and alter scheduling for high-risk defendants. Over the course of 3 months, she logged into the system after hours 19 times. Most of those sessions lasted less than 10 minutes, just long enough to change a status, remove a tag, or print a transfer request. The FBI began to suspect she was not acting alone. They expanded their focus to include everyone in her administrative division. That's when the scale widened. By reviewing financial records, investigators discovered that 4 court employees, including 2 clerks, a security officer, and a deputy bailiff, had received unreported deposits from companies registered in Delaware and the Virgin Islands. These deposits were labeled as consulting fees and ranged from $8,000 to $37,000 per transaction. They occurred in regular intervals, often the day after a case was closed or a shipment was signed off. None of the recipients reported side employment. What linked them all was not just the money, but the timing. On a Friday in March, one employee received a wire payment labeled Q1 retainer within 12 hours of signing a release order for a trailer carrying sealed narcotics evidence. The trailer was later reported missing, with its GPS tracker having been disconnected during transit. No collision was filed. The incident was written off as a transport delay. That same day, the clerk who authorized the route logged out of the system at 3:12 a.m., 3 hours after her shift had ended. As these events accumulated, the FBI's internal mapping team built a timeline. They color-coded every suspicious case, payment, and document alteration on a physical wall chart. By the 3rd week of analysis, a shape began to form. The chart showed a network of activity that moved in coordinated cycles. Each cycle included a judge's office, 1 or more clerks, transport officers, and an off-site storage point. The cycles lasted 2 to 3 weeks each, always concluding with either a closed case or a missing asset. This was not sloppy corruption. It was a closed system functioning beneath an open court. Among the most disturbing discoveries came from a forgotten archive vault under the building's south wing. The room had been used to store sealed exhibits and outdated case files, but when agents inspected the vault, they found 6 boxes labeled Evidence Destruction Queue that had never been reported as received. Inside were sealed bags of narcotics, bundled cash, and digital storage drives. Several items matched entries from missing evidence logs in neighboring counties. Others had no label at all. Even more troubling was the adjacent access log. It showed multiple badge entries from users whose employment status had been terminated months earlier. Security footage confirmed that the room had been entered at least 7 times over 2 weeks by individuals wearing civilian clothes but using restricted identification cards. Key witnesses were rescheduled. Chain of custody documentation vanished or was flagged as incomplete. One file showed a defendant listed as in custody when video surveillance proved he had never been booked. At this point in the investigation, Homeland Security and ICE agents were brought into the fold. Their mission was to track financial movement across state and national borders. Within days, they uncovered a pattern of shell companies routing funds through small investment firms, land-holding trusts, and consulting groups. The names changed, but the flow remained the same. Offshore funds entered through Caribbean-based financial institutions, passed through intermediary accounts in Florida and Texas, and exited into private accounts tied to courthouse employees and regional law enforcement. One of these shell companies had recently purchased a commercial warehouse on the edge of Savannah's shipping district. Another had acquired land in southern Illinois that included a set of refrigerated storage units. Neither property was listed under the name of any known suspect. However, both showed utility activity associated with packaging machinery, the storage of chemicals, and the use of encrypted Wi-Fi routers. The warehouse in Savannah had never reported any business licenses, yet power usage spiked on the same nights that trailer deliveries were marked in court logs as sealed transport. In both locations, agents would later find blueprint documents showing drop-off coordinates, security footage of men wearing tactical vests, and checklists printed in Spanish and English. It was not just about moving drugs. It was about building a parallel system, one where court authority could be bought, documents could be rewritten, and assets could be rerouted without anyone noticing. At this stage, some investigators were still hoping this was an isolated operation. However, that belief was shattered when they discovered a map drawn by hand on the back of an old courtroom ledger. It showed routes stretching from Georgia to New York, over to Texas, and south toward Miami. Red stars marked drop points. Blue lines traced shipment cycles. A note at the bottom read, "Reset in 12 days." In the middle of this mounting tension, one internal memo sparked deeper reflection. A lead agent wrote, "If this is happening in one courthouse, how many others are compromised?" It was a chilling question, and it opened the door for a new layer of investigation, one that went beyond Georgia, beyond the envelope, and into the possibility of a national network hiding behind legal paperwork. By now, the FBI had also linked one of the court aides to a separate immigration fraud probe in New Jersey. ICE flagged a phone number used to register a consultancy firm in Newark. The exact number was later used to apply for a courthouse parking pass in Georgia. These overlaps suggested that the network may have used shared resources across multiple jurisdictions, coordinating court dates, witness logistics, and even police escort schedules. That discovery triggered an internal debate among agents. Should they proceed with arrests immediately or wait to identify more nodes in the operation? Some warned that early action might scare suspects into disappearing. Others argued that the longer they waited, the more evidence could be destroyed. Ultimately, the decision was made to act, quietly, simultaneously. The agencies began planning what would become one of the most complex multi-state raids in recent memory. Locations were identified, warrants were drafted, assets were frozen. The list of suspects grew, now including 21 officers, several clerks, and private contractors embedded in government contracts. Before the raids began, federal officials gathered in a secure location to align strategy. They reviewed floor plans, deployment zones, digital access points, and potential hostiles. What started as a traffic stop in Georgia had evolved into a coordinated strike across 7 states. This was not the end of a case. It was the beginning of a purge. Are you shocked that this happened inside a U.S. courthouse? Do you think deeper networks remain hidden in other states? Share your thoughts in the comments below. In the next part, federal agents strike across the country. What they uncover is not just criminal, but carefully designed infrastructure buried beneath the legal system itself. The names appeared one after another, some from courthouse files, others from patrol rosters, and a few from retirement lists that had been quietly updated in recent years. 21 people, all with direct connections to law enforcement or judicial operations, were now suspects in a federal criminal case. Their roles varied, but their purpose had been the same. They had helped drugs move through America without detection, not by avoiding the law, but by becoming part of it. Among the group were 14 certified law enforcement officers. Some were still in uniform. Others had left their positions months earlier and moved into private security or consulting roles. All had once carried badges, some still did. But according to federal investigators, they were working on behalf of a cartel that operated across state lines and deep inside the American legal system. 2 of the most recognizable names were sitting sheriffs, Milton Gaston from Washington County and Bruce Williams from Humphreys County. Both were elected officials. Both were sworn to protect their communities. And both were now accused of using their authority to ensure that illegal narcotics shipments passed through their jurisdictions without delay. Investigators tracked their involvement through a combination of surveillance, financial records, and communication intercepts. Sheriff Gaston had authorized special patrol escorts for evidence transport, but the vehicles in question never reached storage. Instead, they were observed diverting onto back roads and were later found to be empty. Sheriff Williams had issued temporary access badges to out-of-state contractors who were not listed in court records, but were later seen on security footage entering sealed areas of the courthouse. The deeper the investigation went, the more disturbing the picture became. These were not minor infractions. They were coordinated actions designed to ensure the safe passage of cartel shipments disguised as law enforcement operations. In at least 9 separate instances, police officers had provided direct armed escort for vehicles carrying cash, narcotics, or both. The convoys used marked units, functioning sirens, and followed official traffic routes to avoid suspicion. Officers drove ahead of the shipments, cleared intersections, and communicated in coded language over secure channels. Their presence made it nearly impossible for routine patrols to intervene, as the operations appeared fully authorized. Body camera data from one unrelated traffic stop showed a narcotics vehicle passing with 2 cruisers in front. The officer in the video had no reason to stop them. On paper, it was just another internal transport. In addition to an armed escort, several officers were linked to falsified warrant paperwork. Investigators found 3 search warrants that had been modified after being approved by a judge. The edits removed addresses, changed descriptions of evidence, or inserted new justifications that were not present in the original drafts. These changes allowed cartel members to move product through inspection zones without triggering legal conflicts. One form, filed in Texas and later reused in Georgia, had been signed off on by an officer who was on vacation at the time of signing. The officer's badge number was used again the following month in an unrelated case. Courtroom security footage revealed another layer. In 3 locations, officers appeared to swap evidence bags after hours. The bags were relabeled, resealed, and logged back into the system with false chain of custody entries. When the original items were tracked, Investigators found that they had been replaced with look-alike substances or weighed down with fillers to match expected totals. Surveillance from 2 states showed off-duty patrol cars parked outside warehouses that had previously been flagged for suspicious activity. One location in New Jersey had been placed under watch after a chemical shipment raised alarms at a port facility. A month later, 2 of the indicted officers were seen exiting the building with sealed containers in hand. No search warrants were filed for that visit. It became clear that these individuals were not acting randomly. They were part of a system. Patrol logs from 3 counties showed overlapping schedules between officers, including shift swaps and coordinated days off. One sergeant appeared in Georgia, Florida, and New York over 10 days. He filed no travel claims. His personal vehicle was not tracked. However, financial statements revealed hotel payments, fuel purchases, and encrypted phone rentals, all of which were consistent with covert coordination. Federal agents later discovered GPS data from department-issued radios. The movement patterns matched known cartel transit lines. The routes passed through multiple cities at predictable intervals, always coinciding with evidence room updates, case file closures, or sudden court delays. It was not just that the officers were helping, they were running a parallel logistics arm inside the government structure. One warehouse, used as a repackaging center, had been secured using private contractors with expired law enforcement credentials. Their clearances had been approved through forged documentation routed through a regional sheriff's office. The locks were purchased using government funds, and surveillance cameras were deactivated using internal access codes. When the FBI raided the site, they found case files stacked in boxes alongside drug packaging materials. Each folder had been stamped with courthouse identifiers, but did not appear in the digital archives. Perhaps the most shocking detail came from a witness statement. One officer, upon arrest, told federal agents that they had been assured everything was legal. "We were told the judge approved it," he said. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the investigative team. While no direct evidence has yet been found against a sitting judge, the implication raised new concerns about just how far the network extended. Federal prosecutors have remained cautious in how they handle this claim. As of now, no charges have been filed against members of the judiciary. However, investigators are reviewing thousands of internal messages, meeting logs, and clearance documents to determine whether any judicial official knowingly supported or concealed the operation. As public attention grows, law enforcement officials across the region are under pressure to respond. Police departments have begun suspending officers implicated in the incident. Court systems are initiating internal reviews, and federal agencies are bracing for a second wave of indictments as more evidence surfaces. What made this case different was not just the volume of drugs or the number of arrests. It was the realization that for years, some of the people tasked with upholding the law had been actively undermining it. They were not bribed from the outside. They were part of the infrastructure. They escorted, falsified, erased, and protected the very criminals they once claimed to fight. It raises a question that many are now asking. How many more officers were involved but have not yet been named? How many courtrooms across the country are vulnerable to this same pattern of corruption? And how do you restore public trust when the betrayal comes from within the shield? In the next part, the story expands beyond individual guilt as thousands take to the streets. Prosecutors build sweeping indictments, and the government begins confronting a crisis of confidence in the very justice system it depends on. The news spread faster than officials could respond. In Georgia, crowds began to form outside the same courthouse where the secret storage vault had been discovered. People gathered with signs, phones, and questions. They were not shouting about drugs or weapons. They were demanding answers for why their justice system had allowed this to happen. By the third day, the protests had reached neighboring states. In Mississippi and Tennessee, citizens stood outside police departments and court buildings. Many of them had once believed in the people now under investigation. Some had voted for the sheriffs who were now facing federal charges. Others had called these officers in times of emergency, never knowing what was happening behind the scenes. What made the anger grow stronger was not just the betrayal, it was the silence that followed it. For years, people had suspected that something was wrong. Cases went missing. Defendants disappeared. Drug shipments were said to be destroyed, but no one ever saw them go up in flames. Now, all those rumors felt like warnings that had been ignored. As federal agents released more names, local officials began to respond. Several sheriffs held press conferences to announce their resignations. Some said they were unaware of the corruption, others admitted they had failed to act on early signs. One police union issued a public statement stating that it would no longer protect officers who violated the public trust. The message was clear. No one wanted to be seen standing with the accused. Behind the scenes, prosecutors were already building the next step. With more than 20 people indicted and new arrests expected, legal teams began reviewing potential charges. The crimes being considered were not light. They included trafficking, obstruction, abuse of office, and financial conspiracy. But the one charge that carried the most weight was human trafficking. Some of the officers and aides under investigation were accused of helping transport more than just narcotics. Evidence now suggests that certain vehicles moved people across state lines using the same protection tactics that had hidden drugs. This significantly altered the tone of the case. It was no longer about theft or bribery. It was about lives being bought, sold, and relocated under the guise of court authority. The charge of trafficking brought immediate pressure from advocacy groups. Human rights organizations demanded complete transparency. Federal officials were asked whether children had been among those moved. Investigators declined to answer, but confirmed that at least one vehicle had been flagged by immigration enforcement during an earlier stop. That report had been closed without explanation. Now it was being reopened as part of the wider case. Another charge under review was extortion. According to several witnesses, officers demanded payments in exchange for delayed warrants or dropped charges. One clerk allegedly kept a price list inside her desk drawer. The cost of removing a name from the court schedule was $5,000. Releasing evidence before destruction? $7,000. These numbers were found in handwritten notes stored in folders that were almost discarded during the first office raid. Prosecutors were also preparing to charge multiple suspects with obstruction of justice. This included erasing surveillance files, changing arrest dates, and removing evidence tags. In one case, the internal log showed that a piece of narcotics evidence had been checked out for lab testing, but no test was ever filed. Instead, the bag was later found inside a personal locker belonging to a courthouse janitor. That janitor is now under investigation, along with his direct supervisor. The fourth major charge being considered was abuse of public office. For this charge, intent mattered. Investigators needed to demonstrate that officials used their power, not by accident, but to help criminals escape accountability actively. Dozens of text messages, emails, and internal memos are now being sorted for proof. One message recovered from a seized laptop read, "Everything is cleared. The judge is out. Send it tonight." Prosecutors say this message refers to a shipment that left the Savannah warehouse just before midnight on a Friday. That shipment never appeared in court records. In total, the Department of Justice has confirmed that over 100 past cases are now under review. These cases span 5 years. They include drug busts, racketeering investigations, and even homicide trials. Each case had some unusual detail that was overlooked at the time. Now those details are being re-examined to find signs of tampering. Evidence is being reweighed. Video footage is being pulled from old servers. Witness lists are being verified line by line. The process will take months, possibly longer, but officials say there is no choice. Once the foundation of a courtroom has been questioned, every brick must be rechecked. The protests, meanwhile, have continued to grow. In cities like Macon, Savannah, and Jackson, community leaders are calling for federal oversight of local courts. They are requesting a comprehensive audit of officer conduct, campaign donations, and courthouse finances. Some are calling it a reckoning. Others believe it is just the start of what needs to happen nationwide. The question now is not only who committed these crimes, but how many people looked the other way. This investigation has revealed a hard truth. The cartel threat is no longer limited to the streets. It has reached into the very institutions built to stop it. The real danger now lies in how deeply corruption can hide behind a badge or a court order. As new arrests loom and public hearings begin, lawmakers may soon demand reforms to courtroom security, evidence tracking, and digital oversight. However, beyond policy, this case serves as a warning. Justice cannot be sold. And the truth, no matter how buried, will always rise if someone dares to dig until it does. And if you want to be the first to know when that line gets crossed, follow military power, because the moment things go loud, you'll hear it here first.